Welcome back to Black and Briefed. Today we have guest Shavonne Hedgepeth. She is a transportation planner, capital program manager, and Democratic candidate for Maryland's 4th Congressional District. Shavonne holds degrees from UMBC, the University of Maryland, and Cornell University. She has spent years managing multi-billion-dollar capital planning at Metro, one of the largest transit systems in the country, overseeing an $11 billion portfolio of public assets. She knows how federal dollars move, where they get stuck, and who gets left behind when systems fail to deliver. She's running as a challenger in one of the most diverse districts in the country, a district that is 54.6% Black, home to the largest Latino community in Maryland, and where more than 1 in 5 working adults is a federal employee, which matters in the context of what we are going through. Her platform is built on democratic reform, economic justice, immigration overhaul, and what she calls a hope plus hustle approach to governance, pairing vision with execution and follow through. She has described her candidacy as a calling and not just a career move. And she is not running because the party asked her to. She is running because, in her words, my community needs someone in that seat who actually sees them. Just a quick note before we begin, this conversational is educational in nature. It is not an endorsement of any candidate or party. The goal, as always, is to be civically informed and engaged. But please welcome Ms. Shavonne Hedgepeth. Thank you for joining us today. First, I want to start with your background. We want to get to know who you are, who Shavonne is, and what brought you to this moment. So I took some time to go on your campaign website, and something that resonated with me and kind of stopped me in my tracks is you talk about this 17-year journey that you took to graduate, to get your degrees, to get where you are today, and the systems that failed you in the process. So I want you to walk us through that and tell us how that got you to this moment where you've decided to now run for public office.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Danielle. So it did take me 17 years, 5 states and 3 colleges, or excuse me, 3 states and 5 colleges to earn my bachelor's degree. I think a mixture of that has to do with not really understanding who I was and what I wanted to do when I was younger. So I did start in California, and then I was accepted to Clark Atlanta University. Yeah, it was a great time, great time. And I learned a lot at Clark Atlanta. I learned the true value of resilience and just like defining what it is that you wanted, but I did not finish there. And I worked in hospitality for a while after I left Clark Atlanta. And I realized that I wanted to move out of Atlanta. And so I went to New York and I went to Maryland to understand like where did I see myself really growing and expanding and defining who I was. And I settled on Maryland about 10 years ago. And when I first came down here, I worked in a hotel. So my background's predominantly in hospitality. So I'm a yapper. And I went to UMBC, and then I had to pause there. And then I went back to UMBC, and I was working at Metro at the time. And so I was able to help take advantage of the tuition reimbursement program there to close those gaps. But I think what I learned most along that journey is you're going to get a lot of no's. You're going to get a lot of no's until you get to that yes. So having confidence in reaching that yes is what kind of kept me moving throughout that journey. But I did learn a lot. I took a class here at this community college. I took a class there at that community college. So I think what I learned is everyone's pathway to that endpoint will always look different. And it's okay if you have to take one class here or one class there. It doesn't negate the work that you're putting in or the level of effort that you're putting in. So it was a ride. And then I squeezed in. So theoretically, I earned 3 degrees in 5 years, because of the tail end of my career was completed. And then I went straight into my master's at UMD. And then I went straight into my second master's at Cornell. So I've been in school for the last 5 years to kind of reorder what I did not understand about myself at that time. But it was fun. I've met a lot of great people along the way, and I'm really grateful that I stuck to it. I think my grandmother would be very proud of me. She was a very tenacious rattler.
Okay, come on, Rattlers.
Yeah, she was.
Yes,
She was a rattler.
I'm a FAMU grad myself, so yes.
Yeah, she has this story she told me when she was younger. She was at FAMU and she didn't have enough money to complete her tuition. And she was an RN. And she went to the dean and was like, "Oh, I have to go on this bus." And the dean was like, "Lucille, you don't have that money." And my grandmother is 4'11", probably 4'10". And she said, "Well, I'm getting on that bus." And so she ran out the office, got on that bus, and her last name was Walker. So she was the last student. And she just knew they were going to tell her to go back home. And they called her name and she was able to complete her program. And when she came back to FAMU, she asked who she, the balance to. She wanted to get a job to cover it. And the dean said, "I don't know what you're talking about. So she told me that it may look a certain way as you're moving through the fog, right? But there's always going to be a guiding light that you may not even know is shining a path for you. So I kind of held fast to that. And one class at a time, I chipped away at it. And now I'm very grateful for the journey because I think it built up a different level of strength in how I navigate barriers and boundaries.
Absolutely, absolutely. First of all, the fact that she was a rattler, yes, she knows exactly what she's talking about. We strike, strike, and strike again, and we don't let systems get us down for too long. Mm-hmm. But I love that your story is unconventional. I think especially at a time where we have people who have not taken the traditional path into politics, it's very refreshing to see that. I think that your story is much more reflective of the average person than it is, again, like the career politician who graduates and goes to the Ivy League and just knew that this was the path that they were going to take. With that being said, something else I noticed on your campaign website is that you talk about how you've, I guess, discovered that you have an ancestor that was sold from a plantation in Maryland in the 1880s, but you're running for Congress to represent the very state where that ancestor was enslaved. You call it a calling and not a coincidence. So let's kind of dive into that. How did you discover that? And also, how does it feel to, I guess, have this full circle moment all of these years later where now you're running to represent the very state that enslaved your family?
Yeah, thank you. His name was Edward Dorsey. And yeah, it's interesting. So Black geographies are deeply, deeply personal to me. I think when you think about Black Americans and our resilience within the country, we are the embodiment of I'm going to move around to protect and preserve my family, right? So he was in Howard County, Maryland on Dorsey Plantation. He was sold to New Orleans. After New Orleans, he moved to Boley, Oklahoma, and then they made the migration to California. And so when I moved to Maryland, I didn't know that I had any type of heritage here in any possible way. But I think that is an unsung placement in Black history or Black American history, is this generational dedication to persevering and pivoting and being adaptable to the climate. And when I found out, my cousin told me, because they're currently working with the university to get him acknowledged as one of the 272 slaves that Georgetown sold to stay solvent, because that he was in that bundle. But for me, I think it speaks to the possibilities that he could not fathom at the time, right? I don't think he could have envisioned that I would sit in the seat in Maryland and attempt to run for office. And so I kind of tell myself it's like running in a space where he couldn't even sigh without reprieve, but the work that has been done by him and the other, ancestors to create this opportunity, it's an honor to be able to put my name on a ballot for the state of Maryland. And hopefully I do him proud. It is genuinely, it's a full circle moment, to hear the journey from Maryland through New Orleans and Oklahoma to California. And now my journey, I was actually born in Florida. I was born in Hillsborough County, Tampa.
Okay. Yeah. Come on, Tampa. Yeah.
So to go from Florida to California to Atlanta, back to Maryland, it's like we're all connected, in some capacity. So it's a beautiful experience, honestly.
That's what I wanted to ask. Mm-hmm. You have lived a little bit of everywhere around the United States. And I think that The era, unfortunately, of American history that we're living in is very divisive. It's divisive along party lines. It's divisive, obviously, around race and gender, socioeconomic status. But then when you look at it from a political standpoint, we also are starting to become divided between red states and blue states and northern states and southern states. As someone who has had a very diverse living arrangement, having lived in all of these different states or different regions, what is the common thread that you see among all Americans? What are the things that unite us and don't divide us based on region or class or gender or race?
Honestly, I think it's the desire to achieve more and your definition of what more looks like, right? Because success will look different for everyone because we all have different goals. But from California, I have friends who have found success in their pathways. In Atlanta, I have friends that have found success in their pathways, and same with Maryland. And I think that's rooted in survival, right? A lot of us, as a first generation, theoretically college student, we don't know what success looks like. We don't know what brings us joy. And so I think across the three states, everyone is understanding what brings them joy and clinging to it, especially in these particular times. It's very challenging to understand what life looks like outside of the work, right? And so now we have a lot of opportunities popping up for community to be built. Right? We're living in a loneliness epidemic. Social media creates more and more barriers to personality expansion, community building. And I think that's one of the threads that I'm seeing in terms of connectivity is everyone is seeking out a way to find joy. Like when I was in Atlanta, I used to intern at the High Museum and we used to have like jazz at the museum.
Yeah.
And I loved that internship. They were so fantastic. It wasn't, as popular as it is now, right? But it's a very low barrier entry to like not just networking, but to just sit on the lawn with a blanket and listen to, music. We also see pop-ups of like movies in the park, right? We see a lot of opportunities to come together in ways that requires you to kind of go outside of social media and go outside of yourself. So I think that is a common thread is everyone is searching for how do I define my joy, which is obviously a challenge in this particular climate, but I do see a lot of resistance and perseverance in that space. And I think that is a very valuable thread to maintain.
Absolutely. So we're now kind of going to dive right into some policy
Okay.
standpoints. We have watched executive departments be used as essentially Gestapo to fulfill a political agenda that is predicated on separation, predicated on this idea that those who are different than us are scary and they're dangerous and they're going to steal our jobs or steal our way of life. And we see that primarily in the use of immigration and custom enforcement to press this agenda. Now, you take a very firm stance, I think firmer than a lot of maybe your opposition and firmer than a lot of establishment Democrats to say directly that ICE needs to be abolished. Make the case for why abolition and not just reform is the answer to this issue.
Absolutely. And the reason why I say abolishment is because ICE was born of a response to an attack, right? So there was no real proper planning and designing what enforcement would look like in the landscape after 9/11. And so it was kind of thrown together. Compounding that issue is we haven't had any real meaningful change to immigration and pathways to citizenship since the 80s. And the closest we got to it was dismantled because of division and wanting to have a talking point. And so, in order to design a system that is actually efficient at creating sustainable pathways to citizenship, we cannot have a legacy of violence that runs tantamount or parallel to it. So we have to make sure that we're passing meaningful legislation to streamline and safeguard the policy of immigration reform. And secondary to that, ensuring the systems on the other side can also respond to the change in direction. Because a lot of times we pass legislation, but we don't understand what that impact looks like from an execution perspective, and then it doesn't work the way that it's designed. And now we're back right where we were before the policy was passed. So there needs to be, to be frank, immigration enforcement has been a part of American history since the dawn of time. Like ICE does not exist without previous steps, but the legacy of enforcement has always been rooted in slavery. So until we can reconcile with what does ethical reform look like in terms of immigration management instead of enforcement, I think enforcement should not be the way that we move forward with trying to preserve the lives of people who are seeking better opportunities, especially with the history of our nation. But it does start with a full strategic overview of what does the allocation of responsibility look like to preserve their dignity and our dignity as a nation.
Now, where you are running has a pretty substantial Latino community. What are you seeing in Maryland and specifically in your specific district as it comes to ICE? And how is it being addressed at this moment? What is your community going through?
So there are instances of ICE facilities being purchased, and I think the local leaders are doing a great job at curtailing and stopping it where it is. Like I know in Atlanta, they were like, you can't tell us the zoning permits for this, how much water you're going to use, what your electrical usage is going to be. We're going to cut it at the knees. And so I think now, unfortunately, we are getting moderately more proactive to what's happening. But I will say there's also really great responses on the ground in terms of creating mutual aid support centers for families impacted by immigration, as well as creating a communication channel that communicates, hey, we've seen ICE here in these locations, avoid it if you can, right? So there's a lot of, I would say, partnership between local government, state government, and people on the ground who care to preserve and protect our residents. But in terms of federally, we're still grappling with the funding mechanism. And on my platform, for me, budgets are a moral document. And we know, and we've discussed multiple times, how budgeting procedures have failed a lot of marginalized communities. Now we're trying to leverage a budget to push policy, but it's causing other individuals to be impacted by that governance issue. It's a dualistic approach or feeling because you can feel inspired by how community has shielded the members, but then it's also demoralizing that we even have to stand up and fight back against this level of tyranny.
Now, we have not seen reform, true reform in the immigration system since 1986. And then we had a bipartisan bill that failed.
Mm-hmm.
It was deliberately killed in 2024, going into the 2024 election, so that immigration could remain a campaign issue. To you, what does comprehensive reform actually look like? And what does it need to look like for it to be a real thing?
Comprehensive reform to the immigration bill looks like, well, okay, two prongs. One, we have to be very transparent in what we're trying to achieve, because to your point, a lot of voters do not have access or the resources and time to really understand what's trying to get passed through a bill. But we have to have significant designations for what refugee status is, and then pathways to support them when they do arrive, because we understand globally, we all have a responsibility to the communities that we've also interjected ourselves in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that is an output of that. So clearly defining what that looks like and making sure that the people on the ground who are doing the work have the resources they need to respond to the caseloads. So we aren't keeping people in the court systems extensively without any real resolution in sight. So it does take a bit of, I don't want to say upskilling, because it isn't upskilling. It's more so equipping us nationally to be able to respond to the requests that we receive, and then making sure that the courts are properly supported in navigating these experiences. So it is a much larger ask, but I do believe that the bipartisan bill that we had in 2024 was the most reasonable response to what we're currently experiencing, and it was shuttered for headlines and policy movements.
Governor Wes Moore, very, very jealous, honestly. And he has been doing all that he can in the state of Maryland to shield against some of the federal policies that are trying to come down, and also just to keep Marylanders in safety and security. So some of the things that he has done recently is that, of course, he has banned Maryland jurisdictions from entering these 280 agreements with ICE. He has also proposed $10 billion in investment in public schools, and he has framed his entire agenda around protecting Marylanders from federal overreach. Now, what is Maryland getting right that you would want to continue to amplify on the federal level?
Well, education is huge for me, right? I'm a public school girly. And I do understand that we've lost a significant amount of our federal funding. And it was under the COVID flush that we received from the federal government. And a lot of people do not really understand how beneficial that influx of cash was to our product. And so restoring those original federal streams are extremely important to me, because I think we often forget how successful institutions are when they receive proper funding. And that money was being spent very well at the state level for the schools. So I think that is a really great, it's in my platform. So that is really important to me. I think for me, I think also the barriers he's placing in those places for ICE to not attend or not enter is great use of power, let me tell you, because it's like you have to know where you can and cannot move things. And so being able to show the people this is within my purview, this is what I'm going to do despite what's happening federally is amazing. The only place that I would like to see more solid structure, and I do believe a lot of it has to do with federal levers, is infrastructure development. A state of good repair, as you know, less in the transportation world like to say. I think infrastructure is a very unsung necessity for a campaign, because infrastructure is one of the quickest ways you can actually show this is where your money is going. You can see a difference on the roads between Monday and Friday, right? When things are adequately funded. And so I think that is something that is really important to me, not just because of my transportation background, but because those are the ways that we show people your money is actually being delivered. And these are the day-to-day changes that you're seeing in your lives. But that is also a federal grant, right, opportunity. So what I would like to do through my office is allow the local government and constituents on the ground, as well as nonprofits, to understand how do we scope out a project? How do we make sure that it's on schedule? How do we make sure that the budget is right? And how do we make sure we have the technical expertise to move this forward so it doesn't languish in design and engineering standards for a long time? And that's something that Congress has not typically talked about doing enough. They do it, right? But it's not something that people really are associated with how it looks in their day-to-day life.
Absolutely. I actually, when you talk to the average person about what matters to them or what issues they want to hear, especially candidates on the federal level talk about, you often don't hear infrastructure. And in a country that is consistently developing, we're always seeing new commercial properties. You have these big developers that are coming in and buying up all the land and then building these single family homes. You can have a lot of development, but if the infrastructure is not ready for the amount of people and traffic that are going to come in, you have a huge problem. So I'm glad that you touched on that. On the topic of budgets, because that is also something that you have direct experience with. Maryland is currently facing a 1.5 billion, dollar budget deficit, driven in part by what you just discussed, these federal funds being pulled back by the federal government. How does a member of Congress from your district help shore that up from the inside?
Yeah, great question. I'm really excited you asked it. So a little bit about what I do at work is I take ideas into investments. So if you're like, hey, Shavonne, I have this HVAC that needs to be replaced at this facility, I'm going to ask you, okay, well, how many HVACs are in the facility? Right? How many facilities are encountering this problem? What's the operational impact? What's the risk of not doing this investment, right? So we have to build a strategy. So then that way, when we're looking at everything agency-wide, we can say this is a priority because of And I think when it comes to explaining why these federal cuts are harmful, who they're impacting, that's a narrative cultivation strategy that is coupled with coalition building. So being able to articulate the further risk, right, of these cuts and what that means. And secondary to that, we have a lot of federal workers, right? So our residents are literally pouring into these systems day in and day out through furloughs through changes in administrations, making sure that every other American citizen has what they need. So the onus is on us to craft the narrative to show the viability and the necessity of why the federal dollars have to come back into the district. Because right now there's a lot of abstraction occurring and there's not enough reciprocity. So understanding, like right now we have a primary care doctor shortage, right? There's only one primary care doctor for every 200 residents. And so with the big, beautiful bill, we're also seeing barriers and cutbacks as to why I shouldn't go be a nurse or I shouldn't go to medical school, right? So understanding the full scope of the challenges that we're navigating and articulating that into a very, very specific narrative that justifies why this amount of funding has to come. It isn't just like we have a lot of federal workers going to the government. We have a lot of federal workers going to the government, and this is their impact. And this is what these federal funds impact for us with boots on the ground. And that's what it means in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. Like these are the risks that we're encountering. And I think we have the brilliant people to contextualize it. It's just more so about packaging it and getting it right. And for the nonprofits that are on the ground, it's predominantly like, what technical skills do you need to help you get this funding? And then the congressional office can close that. So it has to be on both sides. It isn't just the state money. It's also the community partners on the ground holding these food banks, holding these initiatives for students. Like even when the government was shut down, there were a lot of food drives specifically for government workers, which is also why food insecurity is a huge part of my platform, because everyone thinks food insecurity is limited to one swath of the community, but it is cross classes, right? Because food insecurity isn't, oh, I have to have bread and butter tonight. Food insecurity is I have to choose between 2 or 3 meals today, or I have to, really noodle on how I'm going to get all of my protein, all of my fiber, all of my fresh fruits and vegetables, right? And as everything keeps going up in cost, how are we going to really advocate for, federal funding if we can't get people in the door, working the way that they would like to work? So it's strategy, it's narrative cultivation, but it is also like targeted storytelling, because that's all a bill really is, right? You're solving a problem through this piece of legislation and building that coalition.
And I feel like what I heard you say, without necessarily directly saying it, is that there are a lot of states that contribute a significant amount to federal budget in taxes. But when it comes time for those states to receive the return on the investment that they're making, there are conditions being put on it, or the things that specific state needs are not being met because it is not a federal priority. And on Black and Briefed, we talk about knowing where the power lies, so you know who should be held accountable for what. In the grand scheme of things, Congress's really one job is to determine where your taxpayer money goes. They hold what's called the purse strings, right?
Correct.
So they are the only branch of government really that should be approving or denying budgets, right? So when we talk about like Maryland public schools not having enough money to feed children, which goes into food insecurity that you were just talking about, because there are many students that the only meals that they are getting are breakfast and lunch and guaranteed meals. It's happening at school. So when you talk about that, but then you see the amount of money that Marylanders are paying in federal taxes, you have to ask yourself, am I getting back what I'm putting in? And that is your money. This is not the government's money. So again, when you talk about storytelling, it is so important, because storytelling is where you make these very convoluted legalistic policies narrow down into what your everyday life looks like. And I think in the last couple of elections, we've just seen a great disconnect in that messaging. I really appreciate the fact that you connected those dots, but I wanted to connect it a little further.
So I was like, I don't disagree with you. I think that we have collectively, so fun fact, I was actually registered as unaffiliated until this run. It is a close primary in Maryland, right?
Yeah.
And so because of how blue we are, the primary is the election in the state of Maryland, right? So they said I can either go get signatures or I can, declare. And I knew that there was going to be a very long journey ahead of me. And so it's like, what is the best use of my time? Like, is it talking to voters to ask them to sign to get me on somewhere? Or is it to talking to voters to make them feel seen and heard again? Right. So it's like, if I do the signature route, it's already starting out as a transaction.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the transactional component of campaigning can be a challenge to navigate. Like, I went to the No Kings protest and he was like, "Oh, do you have any campaign material?" I said, "No, I just came out here to support." And he was like, "You're supposed to be campaigning everywhere." And I was like, "Yeah, you're supposed to." But I think there's more value in showing up for the people who are doing the work instead of speaking over the work that they're doing. Because at the end of the day, I'm running to represent them, not overtalk them. And so he was like, "What's your name again?" Like, and it's like, okay, because we get so caught up. But to take it back a beat on the communication side, I think because we're struggling with fresh perspectives
Mm-hmm.
and what actually hits from a communication perspective, because what sounds good to Jim down the street may not sound good to Shavonne sitting right here. And so being able to really navigate and make it very accessible. This is the problem statement. This is the solution. This is how you help. This is what my job is. Like, really breaking it down to that granular level so it's easily receptive. Because again, these people, we're just trying to make it through the day.
Yeah.
A lot of us are trying to make it through the day. And so I don't want to read a long brief. I don't want to do extra work to understand what you're running on. Like, when I built my platform, I was very specific on a district first platform. A lot of Democrats running the same thing: Medicare for all, immigration reform, affordable housing. Like, yes, all of those things are baseline. That should be expected from a Democrat. But what are you doing specifically for the people in your district? What do the problems look like that you're trying to solve? Not nationally, right? Because all you can take from them is money. What you need to do is understand what your people are dealing with every single day and translating that into policy. And so I understand that there's a very different demographic in Prince George's County. We have outside the Beltway, inside the Beltway, and those concerns vary. But from a messaging perspective, they're all connected, right? Everybody wants equitable access to grocery stores. Everyone wants equitable access to opportunities to enjoy their life outside of work, right? So I can go on a tangent. I'm going to dial it back in. But I think that messaging and storytelling is just as critical as the policy that we're trying to push through in the seats that we're trying to seat on the committee, not to sound redundant. But you have to make sure that people understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if you have to pivot, you need to understand that as well.
So you are running in a very busy primary. There are 6 Democrats in the primary. You're running against an incumbent. What sets you apart from the 5 other Democrats that you're running against?
I think what sets me apart is my interpretation of what care looks like and what execution looks like. At one point, I was branding myself as the implementation candidate, right? But who knows what the hell that is? So it's like, I think because I'm more focused on actually delivering versus saying what I can and cannot deliver, I think that is something that sets me apart. And I have no problem like getting in the weeds and getting down and dirty in the gutter, like to clean up and make things work right for my people. And it's interesting you say that because I had like posted on threads like, oh, federal workers are extremely connected to the small business community here. And just as they are impacted, so are our small business owners. And they are economic drivers, right? Of our districts. And I went out to volunteer to pack some food because someone I met at another volunteer event over the summer invited me. And she was like, "Oh my God, I just followed you off of your thread." And she was like, "You're actually like in the community, like packing, like you're doing the work. It's not just like I'm behind a screen or I'm behind, a CNN desk, right? I'm actually like out there in the community and I'll put a lot of miles on my car. We'll zoom all the way down District 4. But I think that is something that is very different, is being in the community, dedicating my time in these spaces to make sure that I'm understanding what their concerns are, and not just because I'm soliciting it, but it's happening organically.
Now, what do you tell the voter that says, we don't want to risk the seat, voting for the incumbent is safe? What do you tell them to convince them that you are the better candidate?
Interestingly, I had that conversation today at the No Kings rally. And the gentleman said that, he has the votes, right? And I was like, I think he has the institutional voters, but there are over 200,000 disengaged voters between the ages of 19 and 45. And I think that is where the work is. So although I may not have millions of dollars in the bank, I can sure put gas in my car and drive and talk to them and listen to them. And that will be the coalition that can take us over the top. And voter turnout is historically low in very safe Democratic seats. But I think that's also because people haven't found or been introduced to a candidate that they could be curious about. Like, I think, like I said earlier, people are fatigued. And so sometimes they're constantly inundated with copy and paste strategies, right? And so it's like, what is it about my platform, or what is it about me as a candidate that I could expect anyone to even want to consider mailing in a ballot, showing up for open voting, volunteering for me, or showing up for the day? And it's just that I show up as my full self. Like when I first started running, they're like, you're gonna have to cut your nails. No, I'm not. I'm a medium stiletto girly, and I will always be a medium stiletto girly. Like, I love anime, right? I love, that is who I am. That is who you're getting in that package deal. Like, you're getting all these aspects of me. And I know that just as hard as I worked for myself to get 1 degree, I'm going to work 1,000 times harder to get you what you need. And I do think that is a difference in my tenacity.
You lead your platform with democratic reform, which includes campaign finance, voting rights, the filibuster, term limits, and you frame it as the foundation everything else rests upon.
Mm-hmm.
Why does a district dealing with food insecurity and healthcare deserts need to care about structural reform first?
So I think, I think sometimes we get a little too binary or siloed. Like, we all have the capacity to do more at the same time. When I first started running, they were like, pick one thing and be really good at that. And I was like, but we don't need one thing. We need multiple things. So I believe that I have the capacity to do it all. Because what's the point of reforming something in 2026 if we're going to have to deal with it again in 2036? So it's like making sure that, and policy takes forever to move, which is why I also focus on short-term wins. I cannot, change the landscape of democracy in 1-2 year term, right? But what I can do is continue to lay each brick, which is why my campaign slogan is brick by brick. Prince George just moves forward, right? It's like, I'm already trying to show people that I'm not going to overpromise and underdeliver, because my goal is not to just have you support me because of what I'm saying is nice. My goal is to have you support me because you believe that I will be dedicated to delivering consistently, right? So you cannot change one hole in a ship if you have 75, right? You have to look at the full scope of all of the holes in the ship and understand, where can I plug the most leaks as possible to give me more time to keep it afloat. And I think that's kind of where we are as a democracy, is there are a lot of holes in the ship. So now we have to plug as many as we can, strategically as we can, to get to the dock, to change out the boat. And I think that's what this session of Congress presents us, because we've had record retirements. We have record challenges against incumbents, more progressive challenges against incumbents. So if we do want any type of ideological change to this 120th congressional session, right? So that's kind of where it has to all be together, because I don't want to put a Band-Aid on a puncture wound anymore. I think we've done that enough. I think it's time to actually treat the full scale of the wound. This is a very tense thread I'm going to pull. But when Obama was elected, we should have been planning. We saw the writing on the wall. Yes. They let us know exactly. And if we look at the history of any type of momentum that a marginalized class, specifically Black people, have received, it's been extremely oppressive and violent, right? Like, when you think about emancipation, what do we get? Black codes, right? After Jim that, what Crow. Do we get? Jim Crow, Red Summer, right? Civil Rights Act, they took away free college. You know what I mean? Like, so we have a duty as legislators to understand the landscape, the design of that landscape, and our role in cutting off as much of the hurt as we possibly can. And we did not do that. We saw when the Tea Party rose where it could go. And then even when you look at some of their initiatives, they were very strategic in where they aligned their interests, and we haven't done that. And so instead of saying, you know what, let's reevaluate strategically how we identify who is capable and then also support them. We didn't do that. We didn't do it broadly enough to the point where we could have fought back against things that we were made aware of in 2023 and we are now currently experiencing in 2026. Like, it was great to message it, but we didn't really message the overall impact and execution of it. And then even after election, we kind of just put our hands up. And, I think some of the onus is on us.
Yeah.
Right. It's on us, and we have to own that. And then we have to be better prepared and not allow our constituents to feel the brunt of our poor planning.
Absolutely. You pointed to it earlier about spending time speaking to those who have just decided to not engage in voting at all, not engage in the system, and trying to figure out what their pressure points are and what their needs are. And so I think it's a great disservice that is not more of a push by the party, especially considering it is.
It's expensive. We can call it what it is. It's expensive, right? It's costly. You already have to speak to voters 3 to 7 times, but with disengaged voters, it's more like 11 to 15 times, and it becomes costly. And so I think when you have the challenges that we're having economically, the funds may not always align with the strategy, but I don't mind using a little bit of house money, which is my money, and driving around it and talking to people, because I was a disengaged voter at one point in my life. After Al Gore, I was very befuddled. I said, now how did we get here? What happened to this? Right? So I think I know what it's like to feel disillusioned with what you think is the best path forward and not participate. I participated in local elections. And so because I've been in that seat, I've been in that, good, I'm good. It's easier for me to be like, hey, I understand. But if we don't participate, it would only get worse. So what does success look like for you? What does partnership look like for you? What does being seen and valued look like for you? That's a low cost barrier. That's easy to do.
And if we're being completely honest, I think it's something that the other side has done very well. They have played the long game. And I just think that it's something that the Democratic Party has not done a good job at doing. And I still don't think that they're doing all that they can to attack that and to get those disengaged voters back in it. Because when you look at what have been successful Democratic runs, that's how it was done. I mean, Obama went door to there was a lot of grassroots movement, especially, my generation as a millennial. He was the first president I ever voted for. I had just turned 18. We were fired up. We were excited. And to see that and see this
trickle. So
I'm like, how did we get here?
So I have 2 points. One, I was in Atlanta during that time. So my president's black, my Lambo's blue. Like,
absolutely.
The AUC was a lot. It was a time. Okay. And I'll leave it at that. Secondly, I think the problem with Obama and AOC and Mamdani's successes is it doesn't, and these are not detractions from them, is people see it work and they don't want to try to be themselves. And so I think there's a challenge when you don't feel like you can be yourself in order to engender support, because there are only very few examples in the Democratic Party recently, right, that have had this momentous change. And so I think that's where we're struggling, is it's very challenging to define who you are and still be successful. And there's also regional differences, right? Like what worked in New York would not work in Maryland. What works in Illinois would not work in Florida, right? So it's like being able to have that strategic oversight and nuance is not as easy as it sounds, because there are a lot of variables that vary from district to district and race to race. But I think that there is a challenge with people feeling comfortable and being who they are from a candidate perspective as well as a voter perspective, because they have a vision of what a politician is to them. And that is also colored by Obama, AOC, and Mamdani, right? And so there can be disconnects there. But I do think the sooner candidates feel comfortable being who they are from sun up to sundown, the easier we'll be able to see that inspiration kind of span outside of a few instances over the years. So that is my 2 cents. I just think it's a challenge to design who you are when there are certain levels of expectations placed upon what you should be, and they don't pay attention to what you're trying to do.
One of the safeguards I think that the establishment uses to ensure that you are in alignment with agendas that are being pushed is financing. Because let's be real, there are a lot of candidates who are more reflective of the electorate, that can be themselves, that can resonate with voters, that do not get the funding or the push that they need, partially also because they have made certain decisions around their own campaign finance. When Congressman Ivey won the 2022 primary, AIPAC Super PAC spent nearly $6 million in outside money in this district. Outside money in this district race in just a few weeks, with almost none of it touching inside of the district. So you have spoken as a part of your platform about getting money out of politics as being one of those core issues, one of those structural issues that can change all of the other policy issues that we have. Is that race part of what you're responding to in your campaign?
Yes and no, right? I do know that he also ran 2 times before that win. The first time he recused himself because of fundraising concerns. The second time he lost to Anthony Brown. And the third time he was successful with that influx of AIPAC money. But secondary to that, I think that specific race was the most outside money ever spent in a House of Reps race up until that point. So I think that was a pretty early start in trying to understand how much money can we put into these races. And now it's a hot topic, right? We're 4 years later and it's like everyone's like AIPAC this, AIPAC that. And Honorable Donna Edwards did a brilliant job for her district. She brought a lot of jobs, a lot of economic stability, and that was all washed away because of the influx of cash. Yes, campaign finance reform is necessary because it is a significant barrier. Because whenever you speak to, endorsing organizations, they're like, how much money have you raised? And it's like, child, what's in my bank? I don't know. Right. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. What's on my last check? Right. So it's like viability is tethered to money, but money does not show actual momentum in the district because you can't quantify that, right? And so it's like it discourages people from going out on that limb and getting tons and tons of disappointing, we are going to stay out of this race, we cannot participate, you know what I mean? Like, it's when we think about viability, I think viability has to be redefined. If we're going to redefine everything else, viability has to be redefined in the sense of how well will the electorate gravitate towards you, right? And then we can figure out the money on the back end. Like, what does your platform say? What does it try to solve? I think viability should not be limited to one subsect, but the only way we can eliminate that as being a criteria for validation, right, on the campaign trail is to remove how much money is in politics to influence the decisions that we're currently experiencing now. Because if someone's giving you $7 million and they ask you to do Y, but your constituents are asking you to do C, what are you going to do? Why? Because people have so much that goes on within their lives within that 2-year time frame. They're not going to remember that they asked you for C, or at least not enough of them will, right? All they're going to remember is what you're reminding them of, right? So, and if you have the money, then you can pay for a week of commercials in DC, which is $500,000, right? If you have the money, you can send out multiple rounds of mailers, which is about $40,000, right? So it's like, you're going to forget. I mean, now there are responsible voters, theoretically, right, that are going to remember, but it's not going to be enough to push and sway away from the incumbent, because that's what but we lost our healthcare tax credits right? We've had the longest government shutdown in history under this incumbent, right? So it's like when we start really interrogating what does representation look like, I think it's going to be a little different in the primaries, just because we've had such a challenging time in this area. And that's what I've been hearing on the ground, right? It's like, it's a challenge to be able to push back at the scale, but it only takes, 1 or 2 people to kind of really say, you know what? Let me tell 5 of my friends. It only takes 1 of those friends to tell 5 of their friends, right? It's a trickle down effect. And until we get proper reforming campaign finance, which is also something the Honorable Donna Edwards was championing. She wanted to end Citizens United, right? She wanted to create an open field for anyone who felt they had a moment to meet, any call to serve, to help their neighbors. She wanted to help that. So there's a lot of nuance in the conversation around what campaign finance looks like. But I don't think until we can get someone in a seat who truly understands what's needed across the people that they're representing, we'll always run into issues with doors being closed in the faces of grassroots candidates. Because Obama wasn't expected to win. I'm not Obama, but Obama wasn't expected to win, right? But he had tenacity and determination like no one else. No matter what was said to him, no matter how much Hillary was getting propped up, but they wanted him to be her VP. He said, no, this is what I want to do. And this is how I'm going to do it. And he did it. But I think at the end of the day, everyone, regardless of their current salary, is trying to keep their job.
Absolutely.
So whatever that looks like, they're going to do it. And it's up to us, no shade, to disrupt that and put people in who want to keep the job and do the job. There's a difference in keeping it and doing it. And so
Absolutely.
I think that's where the primary is the place to make that distinction.
If corporations are putting money behind candidates on both sides, then even if one side is pushing the agenda forward and the other side isn't, the other side is also not playing defense. And that is a lot of the disappointment, I think, that we have seen, and the capitulation that we talk about, where it's like, y'all are the only branch. Listen, and y'all are the only branch that can do something, and you're not doing all that you can, or you're like halfway doing it. Like, what are we doing? And it's because it's like you said, there's so much job security on Capitol Hill. That's why people are able to die in these seats, is because once you're up there,
you have access, you have luxury. Like you saw what Delta said, look, Congress, we're about to cut you off since you went.
And look
and
how
they were
fast.
Like, wait a minute, not us, right? So
right.
I think I do have a little like story I want to tell you to help before I answer that question or that, your observation. Many, many years ago, I had a friend, we were coworkers, and we were talking about police brutality. And he was adamant that I was making things up, or I was, speaking about things that really didn't happen. And I was like, we can't be friends then, because if you don't see the innate like concern that I have, that there's like a concerned effort to dehumanize people who look like me, then we can't be friends. And we were like really close, like peas and carrots. And so I was really sad to lose the friendship, right? But then a couple of years later, I stumbled across their Facebook page, and they had posted about the death of Alvin Sterling. And it was like, this is absurd, and I was like, that's different than what we were just talking about. So I gave them a ring-ting jingle, and I was like, hey, can you help me understand what's going on here? And they explained to me that what I was telling them, that everyone that loved them in their life had lied to them about the landscape of America. So I think we're not holding space for that as a reality for a lot of people, right? A lot of people are having to fragment away from their families because, like, I have a friend, she's a purple girly, but she has been extremely supportive, with just bouncing ideas off graphics and things like that, because what they would like to do theoretically is in opposition to their entire family reunion, right? And so when we talk to people about like, nah, bro, that was kind of crazy. Like, why'd you vote like that? It's not that you're calling them specifically crazy, but you're calling everyone they love and know around them crazy as well. So then that impact extends to, now I have to reevaluate every single person in my life that has ever loved me. And so I think that is a space we're not really holding for those conversations, because it isn't about like, you don't know what tariffs are. It's like, what does life look like for you now that you realize that you've made a mistake because you followed people who loved you? Are you alone now? Which is why I think No Kings protest can be helpful, because a lot of these people, they're on an island. Like they may have one or two people that they've met in these spaces, but their infrastructure, their support system is theoretically gone depending on how far down, they're willing to go. So it isn't just you voted and tariffs are dumb, you don't know what it is. It's like you're now misaligned with your entire family, your entire friend group, like your safety nets, right? And so I think that is also important to highlight. Is like, I understand you may feel alone. This is different for you, right? It's like a new job, right? So this is different for you. You don't know anybody here, but we are here to help you navigate what this means to have to essentially start life over in some instances. Like you'll see it on Threads or Twitter. It's like, yeah, I had to cuss out my whole family. Now I don't have a family anymore. Hey, y'all, welcome to the blue side, And it's like, those are real things that people have to navigate, right? Or you don't know what their work environment is like, right? So there are a lot of variables that we have to factor in because these are like sums of people that have lives outside of just going into the ballot box. And, even when looking at voter data, it's a lot of purple houses. The wife is voting Democrat and the husband is voting Republican, right? So when you go knock on their doors, it's like you can't give the same spiel to the man that you would give to I'll come back later. I'll come back later. Don't worry about it, because you don't know what that dynamic is, right? So there's a lot of like cultural and social nuance that sometimes gets lost in, some people just not knowing better. Like you don't know what you don't know, right? You only know what you're told. And so that's kind of how I feel about navigating those discussions because you don't know what you don't know.
Now, what we do know since the start of 2025 is the egregious change or changes that have been made to the federal government and specifically the federal workforce. And you are vying to represent a district where 1 in 5 working adults are federal employees. You cited that nearly 300,000 federal jobs have been cut under DOGE, whatever that was, with downstream impacts potentially reaching 1 million. You've called Black federal employment a primary pathway to the Black middle class. What would be your specific plan to protect those workers? And what do you say to the ones who have already gotten notice or the ones whose lives have already been negatively affected by these federal cuts?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the biggest unsung things too, the first I'll say is a lot of the oversight committees that have the ability to protect our workers don't have a quorum, right? They don't have the necessary bodies in place to really fight for them the way that they should. So restoring that, right? I believe that is a bipartisan issue. Restoring the boards to protect our workers and help them feel secure under this administration. That's one part. Second part is the appropriation seat is a very, very powerful seat. And I'm not saying I'm gonna get it, right? But you can write in the budget language certain civic protections for workers so they are not treated as disposable whenever you want to have a policy fight, right? Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. And I think historically, we, not as in you and I, we're missing the moment because Woodrow Wilson did the same thing. In 1912, he resegregated the government. Now, mind you, at this time in the federal government, Black workers were escorting dignitaries, presidents, like they had that juice on them, like they were moved, like we have pre-K because a Black woman lobbied in Congress to make pre-K a federally funded aspect of school. Anna P. Murray was her name. Her husband, Daniel P. Murray, was, I think, the second director of Library of Congress, first Black man. Right? You know what I mean? Like this was a different ecosystem. And then Woodrow Wilson said, nah, not on my watch. And it stagnated Black wealth for generations in the DMV. And when that ended, right, that was another mechanism. Because at the time they were buying like blocks of houses, like federal workers were doing really well in the area. And I'm not saying that that's what they're doing today, but it's always been an economic driver for stability because it is a very stable employment. The DHS has to be here, the HUD has to be here, right. All of these agencies have to be here because we serve Americans. Being able to contextualize, we've been here before. This isn't the first time that the Black federal workforce has been compromised in administration, right? So now what does safeguarding the federal workers in the future look like? And that's budgets. That's making sure that they have a quorum so that the people who are designed to fight for them can actually fight for them and give them the protections that they need. Those are the biggest, I say, missed opportunities that I believe that we're missing out on. There's a task force in Congress trying to, undo, right? But it's not just about undoing. It's about how do we never get here again? Because this is not our first time here. This is our second time here, like on this scale. So what does that look like? And that's why I emphasize planning strategically. What does safeguarding our employees, our citizens look like? And it's not just affordable healthcare, because you can have affordable healthcare, but if you don't have the systems on the back end to delegate that healthcare, what happens? No one's going to be able to access it because we're going to run into the issues at other places that have universal healthcare, and that's month-long wait times. So how do we take all these best practices, these lessons learned, and really use them to design a situation that protects our federal workers, that prevents them from being in these positions of being furloughed. Like right now at TSA, I believe you can't donate to them, right? Because it would be considered a bribe. So you, outside of food, you can't really help people cover their bills right now. Now, are they going to get paid? Yes. Should it have taken this long for them to get the money that they've been working for? No. So it's not going to be an overnight, one stroke of the pen kind of fix, but it can be fixed. And I think that's what we need to focus on in terms of what does 2028 look like for undoing this and preventing it from happening ever again.
Now, as someone who deals with budgets on a very regular basis, DOGE supposedly was created to help the federal budget to find fraud and waste. Do you think that DOGE did anything of that sort?
Fraud and waste is not just, oh, I don't like the fact that you have Black women on your panel. That's not fraud and waste. That's racism and discrimination, right?
That was going to be my next question. Do you think that this is a concerted, deliberate effort when we talk about the creation of federal employment and the direct effect that it has had on Black wealth and access to the middle class for Black workers, the makeup of the demographics of federal workers? When we look at what DOGE has done or did, right, because supposedly it doesn't exist anymore, can we say with confidence that this was a concerted, deliberate effort to push us back into a time where Black people did not have wealth and where they were more destitute? Are we going backwards to a Jim Crow era type of America?
In terms of economic solvency?
Yes.
Yes, and that's problematic because back then we had safeguards, we had community, we had the church, we had a system where if you were unemployed and my car was working, baby, I'll take you to the next block. I'll take you where you need to go. We haven't really sustained that over the years because we haven't been required to. I also think from what I saw from the briefings is they just typed in words and looked at contracts and didn't really verify what the output would be because they used AI. Right, to search DEI. So I think when you have, and to your point earlier, right, I'm gonna walk it back a bit. When you said that they did a great job of bringing in the younger crowd, those were all young kids. Those were all 20 somethings, early 30 somethings, right? So they don't have life context to really, even if they wanted
understand
right, what they were trying to do, right? So I would say it's 80% malice, 20% ignorance. And I say 20% ignorance just because the level of malice that was achieved, I don't think they have the capacity to design. That's just my 2 cents though. But I think
that was a mic drop moment.
I'm trying to be a little measured here, but I think ultimately I do not believe that they are as smart as they think they are. I just think they walked into a level of destruction that looks like they are as smart as they are. Now the Heritage Foundation, that's another conversation. The brains in that room, because I think I heard, I don't want to be wrong, but I heard that someone very influential there studied African American history. And I will have to, fact check it. I haven't, but it is on my list of things to do. And if that is the case, then everything makes sense. Because these are all replications of previous policy patterns that have SAVE Act. What does that sound like?
That sounds like poll taxes.
Yep.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? When you think about
literacy tests. Yeah.
When you think about the dismantling of the federal government, Woodrow Wilson, right? Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting how parallel a lot of the things that we're experiencing today are just modernized for this demographic, but are designed on policies that were specifically written to disenfranchise Black people. We have to think that we can overcome this as well and really fight to achieve something that our kids and their kids can actually look back and was like, oh, they did that. They ate that one little thing up, right? Like we have to be able they ate that one, like they was struggling, but they got it together in 2026, right? Like that is something that we should endeavor to do, right? Because we can say that about our ancestors. Right. We can say that about the Civil Rights Act. We can say, y'all made them sacrifices, ate them nasty peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? Just to get to where we needed to go. Like we can see their sacrifices. We're living their sacrifices. And so the onus on us is to replicate that and push that forward so our kids can learn about what we've done in history books in this time.
I think you talked about how there's one doctor per 2,000 residents, which is insane.
Mm-hmm.
And over 1,200 neighbors living with sickle cell disease, which of course directly impacts the Black community. Now, Medicaid for all is your position. In the event that we, after all of this, still cannot push the needle forward enough to get Medicare for all, what is your kind of backup plan or the real plan to address the healthcare desert issue of your district?
Well, I think Medicare for all is great. Yes. So research funding is extremely important to me, because if we do not have the research to support the help that we're needing, then it's kind of all for moot. Like, you can have all the doctors in the world, but if we still don't understand what causes fibroids, then what help are we actually providing beyond like a subsect of people, right? Women's health is significantly underfunded. Anything that intersects with Blackness is significantly underfunded. But it's actually two-pronged, because Medicare for all is for a subsect. But once you start getting to those different salary caps, you're kind of pulled out of the provider network. So it also has to mean going after these private insurance companies and making sure that their policies and their designations do not ostracize either group. So it's not just Medicare for all, it's Medicare for all and tackling the privatization sector. Like, they have to be cousins in the instance of what does a healthy and sustainable society look like? And it's both of those options, because you have people who will not be able to get Medicare because they make too much money. And so that ostracizes them in some capacity, right? I mean, yes, they can get Medicare for all, but they're still being stagnated in what their access to care looks like. And then we also have to think about the volume. So if we do Medicare for all, we have a shortage of doctors, we have a shortage of nurses, what is the real benefit? So it's like, we also have to address the education aspect of it as well, and that student loan forgiveness. Right? Yeah. We have to make pathways to medicine more class neutral, instead of it just being something that the privileged or they've inherited. My father's father was a doctor, right? There are a lot of things that we have to undo to have like a sustainable pathway to actually see the benefits of Medicare for all, right? So those are some of the main variables that are feeding into what Medicare for all actually means, because it also means tackling privatization. It also means tackling our shortage of doctors. Like, even in the sickle cell space, there is a shortage of adult specialists in that arena. So even after you age out of 18, say you have the best healthcare in the whole world, you're still not going to be able to have access to the care that you need. So it's a much bigger problem statement, I guess, is what I like to say. I like to think in problem statements, like, what are we actually solving for here? It's a much bigger problem statement, because you can give everyone Medicare for all, but you're going to ostracize a subsect of the community, and you're going to strain the infrastructure that is already compromised. So there are a lot of angles that have to be kind of managed in that space. But I'd rather be, to your point, cautiously optimistic, and then apply pragmatism in the execution, so we can understand and message what we can actually achieve within the time constraints and the budgeting constraints within a 2-year term, right? So, but building coalitions with senators, they have much more leverage than, that's why you see a lot of the larger, heavy hitting bills coming out of the Senate, because they have more time to churn on it and work on it. But I think with every seat in the House being up for re-election, and with so many progressives in the race, I think some real momentum can actually be moved in a lot of these areas, because we are in alignment with those areas.
Now, what do you want the voters of Maryland's 4th District to specifically know about your candidacy that isn't in your standard campaign messaging?
I want them to know that I'm accessible, and that I will work extremely hard to make sure that their life feels better each day in some capacity. Like, you will feel the difference in what I'm trying to do in the House if elected. And I love my job, so.
Now, Shavonne, please let the audience know where they can find you. Let them know what your campaign website is, how they can support your campaign, and then all of the important dates that voters need to know.
Absolutely. So my website is voteshavonneforcongress.com, for spelled out, FOR. My Instagram is Shavonne 4 Congress, and my threads is Shavonne 4 Congress. And the way you can support my campaign is $5 a month goes a long way. It goes a long way. And just signing up to volunteer, and you can help us phone bank. You know, there are a lot of things that you can do outside of the district that can help a candidate get name recognition, repost a post, share it, like it, comment, bookmark it on TikTok. So TikTok algorithm will like me. There's a lot of ways that we can support candidates, and even not even in Maryland, but just across America, right? Like find candidates that you're curious about and help their platforms get that recognition, get that engagement so that they can be successful in reaching the voters in their district, because Threads has an amazing algorithm. I found so many people in the district from, from Threads, and that came from people liking and sharing and commenting, right? Like once it sees who you are and who you're trying to connect with, Threads going to put you in their lap. So, the more you can share and help with our content, that would be super amazing.
And then what are all of the important dates that people in Maryland need to keep in mind so that they can go out and vote for you?
June 11th to June 18th is early voting. In early voting, you can vote at any precinct you want to, anywhere. It could be up the block. It could be somewhere else. It doesn't matter. The primary date is June 23rd. That date, you can only vote at your designated precinct.
Shavonne, I appreciate the time that we've spent together on this Saturday afternoon.
On a Saturday.
Thank you for telling the audience about your platform, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you for creating this space for facilitating conversation. Like, it's so important, it's so needed, and you have a great personality and a great smile, so I hope to see it more across my timeline.
Thank you. I appreciate you.